Hello and welcome again to FAIRtax Power Radio. I'm Bob Paxton.
I'm Jade Walle.
And we are this week's edition of the
The
FAIRtax
FAIRtax guys.
Yeah, there's kind of latency in this video conferencing software. It's kind of hard to get that together just right on the money like that. But Jade, I guess we thank you again for your willingness to step into FAIRtax Power Radio, and we sure appreciate your help here.
I'm glad to do it.
Okay, right off the top of the bat here. Something I want to do, there have been, a lot of very nice memorials and tributes written to Ron Maiellaro. Steve Hayes did a chairman's report that just came out. I think Jim Bennett's going to have a grassroots corner next Monday on that. Of course, we've mentioned it here on FAIRtax Power Radio. You really surprised me there, bud. You flew 2,000 miles from your home in Colorado over here to Florida to attend his funeral, and of course flew home. So you made a 4,000 mile plus round trip to attend Ron's funeral. There must have been a reason for that.
Yeah, Ron was the kind of guy, he was relentless. He was full of energy, 75 years old, but he had the energy of a 25-year-old. And he was dogged, relentless, and determined to do what he thought was best for his country, which is get the FAIRtax passed. And he's got grandkids. He's thinking about them. He served in the Navy years ago. He's a patriot in all respects. And I just really enjoyed his company. Both of you all, I got to meet you all in person back in 2017 when we did our first interview together, 4 years ago now.
Yeah.
And I just appreciate everything he did for the Americans for Fair Taxation, the Florida Fair Tax Educational Association, the entire movement to make this country better in not a small way, in a big way, with the adoption of the fair tax. And I just appreciated his energy, his passion for it. And I just wanted to honor him in a small way and pay my respects by coming to the funeral.
Well, we sure appreciate it. And I say, you surprised me when I walked in there, and yours was the first face I recognized. But, okay, yeah, the program is going to move forward. I mean, it's what I want to do. It's what Ron would want to do. It's what Elaine wants to do. And I'm still not sure exactly what it's going to look like. But in the next couple of weeks, we'll put everything together. And you've certainly been a big help. And we appreciate your contribution as well, and your service on the board of AFFT as well.
No, glad to do it. And I think Ron would have probably told us, he's like, I think you wrote in the chairman's report that he never missed a beat in radio, which was very nice because that wasn't his background like yours.
Yeah.
And he would probably say he had a face for radio, but I think he did an incredible job, and he will be missed.
Yeah. You saw the advanced copy. I guessed a good bit of the chairman's report, but everybody misses him, and we're just going to dedicate this show and everything we do from this point forward to him, and we'll get the fair tax passed. All right.
Yes.
All righty. Let's move on to my favorite segment of the show. Congress.gov. Now, last week, when we talked to John Gaver and Dan McCon in Texas, there really wasn't a whole lot of material there. They must have been on recess or something, but they're back at it now. We got some good stuff here. And some of this looks actually kind of familiar. You may remember this, but this is H.R. 5179 to amend the Internal Revenue Code to extend and modify the credit for carbon oxide sequestration and for other purposes. I remember trying to get Ron, the science teacher, to explain carbon oxide sequestration. Well, it's back.
Yeah, I know. Not carbon dioxide, carbon oxide, yeah.
Carbon oxide sequestration. And H.R. 5194, the 117th Congress, to amend the Internal Revenue Code of 1986 to extend and modify the credit for carbon oxide sequestration and for other purposes. A couple of weeks ago, when we were talking with Steve, and he was co-hosting the show, we found what I thought was a first: two bills that did exactly the same thing from different sponsors, and these two are exactly the same text. One is from Donald Byer, Virginia District 8, and the other one was Representative Terry Sewell, Alabama District 7, both introduced on the same day and both doing the same thing. Now, of course, Steve says there's a lobbyist behind both of those.
Mm-hmm.
But that's,
yeah. I guess both lobbyists will get credit with their client constituents for getting that bill in, I suppose, right?
Apparently so, but I never realized that you could have multiple bills doing the same thing until just a few weeks ago. And now we found 2 instances of it in just a couple of weeks. That is how crazy our tax code is.
Yes. Now I know there's reconciliation between House and Senate bills, but I didn't know within House and House.
No, this
within the
is
same House.
two House bills, HR 5179 and HR 5194, both of them to extend and modify the credit for carbon oxide sequestration and for other purposes. There is no text in either of those, so I can't go any farther. But again, we found 2 of them exactly the same thing, 2 entirely different bills, 2 entirely different sponsors from 2 different states. Your tax code at work.
Well, I think our friend Ron would have said, listen, as it relates to the carbon dioxide, we don't want to sequester too much of that because that's what the plants use for fuel and food to then create oxygen. So sometimes we get a little overzealous on this.
We've got a nice little loop there. We give out carbon dioxide, the plants take that in and give us back oxygen, and that works well. Okay, let's keep on here. HR 5192 to amend the Internal Revenue Code to establish a credit for the production of clean hydrogen and for other purposes. And I think we've seen that before, but I know that you are a CPA, you have been a psychologist. I'm going to see if we can add nuclear physicist to your long list of storied credentials here and get you to explain the difference between clean hydrogen and regular hydrogen.
You stumped me, Bob.
Oh, mercy.
I have no response.
That's a first. Okay, but I tell you, I wonder if it's talking about clean hydrogen, if that implies that there's such a thing as dirty hydrogen, the most abundant and the simplest element in the universe. But all of that is going into the tax code. Just makes you go, what? All right, now here's another one. HR 5185 to amend the Internal Revenue Code of 1986 to provide a credit for qualified environmental justice programs. How much fun can they have with that one?
Wow. Well, goodness, environmental justice. I'm sure that is adjudicated by the eye of the beholder, right?
Yeah, again, this one doesn't have any text in it, so I don't know. Environmental justice just seems to be a really broad catch-all phrase that they want to put a bunch of stuff under that umbrella, and you can get a credit for doing that if this HR 5185 passes. Okay, one more. This is the HR 5089. This was actually introduced a couple of weeks ago, and it does have some text in it, which we're going to get into. But this is the Next Generation Fuels Act of 2021. In the text of this bill, it says Section 30C of the Internal Revenue Code of 1986 is amended by amending subsection C to read as follows in the tax code here. Now, some of this is already here because they're talking about changing it. Definitions. For the purpose of this section, qualified alternative fuel vehicle refueling property. It means the property, not including a building and its structural components, if such property is of a character subject to the allowance for depreciation. B, the original use of such property begins with the taxpayer and is not used as the principal residence within the meaning of Section 121 of the taxpayer. And C, such property is used for the storage or dispensing of a qualifying fuel into the fuel tank of a motor vehicle propelled by such fuel, but only if the storage and dispensing of the fuel is at the point where fuel is delivered into the fuel tank of the motor vehicle, or for the recharging of motor vehicles propelled by electricity, but only if such property is located at the point where the motor vehicles are recharged. And further, the term qualifying fuel means any fuel at least 50% of the volume of which consists of natural gas, compressed natural gas, liquefied petroleum gas, or hydrogen, clean or dirty, or B, any fuel mixture that's at least 20% of the volume of which contain, let's read that again. Any fuel mixture at least 20% of the volume of which consists of ethanol or biodiesel without regard to any denaturant or kerosene used in such mixture, end of quote. That is going into the tax code.
Now, Bob, did you feel the rumble under the ground? Because I think all of the senators, congressmen, and state representatives from 1913 that passed the 16th Amendment just rolled over in their grave.
Oh, mercy.
because of the monstrosity they created. That's incredible.
When I thought of that, I says, you need to go over to your colleagues on the tax side of the house and let them know what's coming at them.
Oh,
Yes, they define qualifying fuel, and they define qualifying fuel, vehicle refueling property is all part of the tax code. And I think if Steve was here, he would say that is insane.
yes. Unbelievable.
Okay. Well, let's see what kind of goodies that Congress critters will come up with next week. It's going to take some doing to top that. Oh, excuse me. All right. Well, let's move on here a bit on FAIRtax Power Radio. Again, we're going to honor Ron Maiellaro with this one. We're going to go back to what us disc jockeys used to call the groove yard. Remember, pull the oldies out of this. A long time ago, somebody here in Florida started mentioning the fact that, hey, let's sell the sizzle, not necessarily the steak, which is the kind of way to say, let's not get into the wonky nuts and bolts of how the FAIRtax works. Let's just go ahead and tell people all the good things that the FAIRtax will do for people. And the leadership back here in Florida said, all right, just come up with several points that you want to communicate to people about how the FAIRtax will make their life better. And we came up with about 10 of them so far. And Ron, in his genius, said, hey, let's turn these into Jeff Foxworthy things. So now it is the first one. If you'd like to put more money in your pocket by eliminating federal withholding from your paycheck or retirement distribution, you might be a FAIRtax fan. It's been a while since we've done these. Hopefully the folks will get a kick out of this.
I know. I don't think the young people will remember who Jeff Foxworthy is. It's so much time has passed. But I think this first point, this first sizzle point, is really one of the most important because it traverses both sides of the aisle, all demographics, all backgrounds. Do you want to keep your whole paycheck? Do you want everything you make and earn and sweat and toil for to be in your pocket, free of basically almost 10% of federal withholding payroll taxes, plus even more on federal withholding? And for folks like you, Bob, who are retirees, when you get your retirement distributions, you're paying taxes on that if it was a traditional IRA or a 401k where you contributed pre-tax. And even a certain percentage of your Social Security distributions, you're paying taxes on. So retirees get to keep their whole pay under this first sizzle point. I think this by far gets people's attention right off the bat, don't you think?
It does, because I know they do take taxes out of my state retirement pension. They take taxes out of my Social Security. And when I start drawing on my 403B, they'll take taxes out of that. But with the FAIRtax, I'll get to keep it all. How cool is that?
That's right. And Bob, I wanted to touch on, you had a good question from Lance a couple of episodes ago, and you addressed it with Steve Hayes on the question was really insightful. Well, wouldn't the elimination of the IRS, and let's just say the 401k and the IRA regulations, wouldn't that under a FAIRtax regime promote more volatile investing? And basically the question was, won't people save less for retirement? And I'd like to, I think everything Steve Hayes addressed on that was absolutely correct. But taking a slightly different angle, I'd say the big thing with 401ks is we defer taxation until we receive that income in our retirement years, right? Same thing with the traditional IRA. Well, what about under a consumption tax? If I want to defer taxation on expenditures, I'll just save it and spend it a little bit later, AKA, for example, in retirement.
Yes.
And it's the exact same setup. I will defer taxation until my retirement if I put some away and save. Now, you're not going to have Big Brother with a stick watching over you on you can't take an early distribution and spend your own money on anything you want without me writing a tax bill about it. And some of your congress.gov points actually address that point. Like you can spend your own money on a first-time home purchase, for example.
Yeah, that was one that I think came up when Steve was on the show.
Yes, but the big point here is you will have freedom as an American. You are a big boy, you're a big girl, you can make your own decisions, and hopefully you're smart enough to save a little bit for retirement. And under the FAIRtax, you will have the same incentive. You will defer taxation if you save for your retirement. So I just wanted to hit that head on.
Okay, and also getting rid of withholding and getting rid of the payroll taxes kind of leads into the second sizzle point.
Right.
That's
And you might be a redneck. You might be a FAIRtax fan if you would like to feed your family before you feed the government.
Absolutely. How many people, if you ask them straight up, which is a higher priority, feeding your family or feeding the government? I bet you very few, if anybody, would say, well, I think feeding the government is a higher duty than feeding your family. But the folks who wrote the tax code, and especially, of course, in World War II is when withholding went in. And they decided,
Right.
we can't wait till the end of the year for everybody to send in their money. We need your money now. So we're going to start grabbing it, off the top. And but that means
Well,
that the government is setting itself up as your highest spending priority, and you don't have any choice. There is nothing you can do about it.
that's exactly right. And you know who that hits hardest is the working poor, the folks that are trying to escape a circle of poverty or certain situations by working harder. And the government says almost 10% right off the bat comes to me before
Mm-hmm.
you can even buy diapers,
Yeah.
formula, bread, and milk. It's audacious. Now, if you're upper middle class, wealthy, that doesn't mean anything. But there's a lot of folks that are working poor, and that
Yeah.
just really inhibits their upward mobility.
Yeah, but just as a matter of principle, you should feed your family before you
Yes,
feed the government, regardless of how much you've got. And of course, what we're talking about here is the prebate that refunds back to every legal household the amount of tax that is paid on your spending up to the poverty level. In other words, your spending on your basic necessities is not taxed under the fair tax. You get that back. And so if you don't take a dime out of your pocket to pay the tax until after you have provided for your family's basic necessities, you are feeding your family before you feed the government with a fair tax.
that's exactly right. That prebate makes it completely tax free for those working poor up to the basic necessities of life, which I love.
Okay. And there was a Jim Bennett addressed this in a grassroots corner not long ago, that under the fair tax, things like rent and clothing and groceries and medicine necessities are going to be taxed. And that was one of the hostile questions that people might raise about the fair tax. Well, with a prebate, that's not taxed. You get it back because that's what you're
That's
going to
right.
spend your first dollars on. Let's move on.
That's
If you'd like, let's see how can Jeff Foxworthy do this. If you'd like to see the IRS disappear from the face of the earth forever, you might be a FAIRtax fan.
I love it. I love it. Well, in just a few points, I remember thinking about this. The things that the IRS knows about you because you file federal taxes, your income, from whom and when and how much, your expenses, for example, your deductions, the charities you support, your medical expenses, whether or not you have health insurance, your bank accounts, your deposits, anything over large deposits over $10,000, they need to know about your home size. So you
Yeah.
have a home office deduction, your square footage of your office, your square footage of your home, your address, your investments, your stocks, bonds, mutual funds, your cryptocurrency investments, capital gains, losses, whether you're retired, what college you go to, or if you have a 529 plan where you get deductions for college expenditures. And the list goes on. That's a lot the IRS knows about you, and that completely disappears from the earth forever. I love it.
Yes, the government helps itself to more information about you and about your personal finances than you're comfortable sharing with your own kids, you know?
Right,
You,
right.
you,
And I realize we kind of skipped to sizzle point number 4 that you might be a FAIRtax fan if you like to keep the government's nose out of your personal financial business. Well, then count me as a FAIRtax fan because everything I just read there, again, yeah, I don't talk with my kids about that, and I talked with my wife about it, but she doesn't care that much. But that's personal stuff.
yeah, it is among the most personal data there is. Your medical records and your financial records. I mean, there's nothing that should be treated with more confidentiality than that. But the government helps itself to all. I mean, it knows everything. It knows every dime you spend, just about, and what you
It
spend it
does.
on, and where you made it, and all the stuff like that. And the fair tax, it's none of the government's doggone business where you get your money from. It's none of the government's doggone business how many kids you've got, how much you give to charity, how much you spend for daycare, how much you spend for medical expenses. I think, Thomas Jefferson would be appalled at how much information people have to. I mean, again, they've got no choice, but to fill out these forms and tell the government everything about them. That's crazy. FAIRtax gets rid of it.
In the FAIRtax, with all that going away, you have complete freedom. Now, with freedom comes responsibility. For example, saving for retirement. But isn't freedom the place where every soul longs to get to, like real freedom? And again, we don't mind the hard work and the responsibility that comes with it, but we just want the freedom. And the FAIRtax is a freedom bill.
Absolutely. And it's also a jobs bill. If you'd like to see millions of jobs created in the United States, you might be a FAIRtax fan. That would be really good if we had all these international corporations moving to our shores. You'd have a lot more business than you do now.
Absolutely. And just think about it. It's really hard to conceptualize a 0% income tax rate on businesses, corporations in America. We become the immediate tax haven of the world. It would almost be overwhelming. Again, good problem to have. But if everyone and their dog and their brother wants to come here, move their corporate headquarters here, build their next manufacturing facility here, 0% corporate income tax rate. And I'm afraid we would almost need guardrails because our economy would be so overheated. Again, that would necessitate more legal immigration and all the positive things that come from that. But again, I'd rather solve a good problem than deal with the bad problems.
But Jade, all these multi-billion-dollar corporations that are making billions of dollars need to pay their fair share.
They do. And I always like to say, the corporations don't get pancreatic cancer, and they don't have a heartbeat, and they are not a person. People pay taxes, and whether it's in the form of less employees, less pay, less R&D, research and development to make the next best product, lower valuations of your business because they're paying corporate taxes, which means less earnings, which means less value, which means less in your 401k account. You have to think it all the way through beyond the 5-second drive-by news soundbite that the evil corporations need to pay their fair share. No. Bob Paxton pays the taxes when corporations pay more taxes.
Yeah, people inherently understand that when you as a retail purchaser buy something, a car, for example, the cost of the labor and materials that went into buying and building that product, you as the ultimate consumer pays for. They can see that the labor and materials. They don't see that the corporation is also passing their tax liability. That is just a cost of doing business. And when you buy something, a product or service, the end consumer pays all of the costs of getting that product or service to them. And that includes their taxes.
It's economics 101. It's not a complex concept, actually. It's fairly straightforward.
All right. We're running out of time here, and I'm going to skip down to another one. If you'd like to save and invest totally free of federal taxation, you might be a FAIRtax fan.
Absolutely. A lot of
that one's right in your wheelhouse.
Well, a lot of folks have invested for the first time, this last, Robinhood and seeing AMC stock and GameStop and some of these volatile movements. And it's intrigued. I've got one of my son's friends who's asking me for help. I'd like to start investing in the stock market. And that's great. But if you think about it, one of the headlines I've read this year, Bob, was people have been surprised because, they've got a tax bill come due because, perhaps they bought AMC stock at $1 and sold it at $2, and they've got to pay tax on that gain when they realized their gain. And so the tax bill comes due. With the FAIRtax, no investments are taxed. And so what that means is you invest your money, which is pre-tax money, by the way. You earn $1 to invest $1 instead of earn $1.25 to invest $1. You will realize your gain. Let's say you sell it for $5, and that $4 appreciation, that's yours. You do not get taxed on investments. When you go spend that money, you will get taxed. But imagine the incentive. You get more of what you tax less, or said another way, you get less of what you tax more. So if I'm not taxing investments, I'm not taxing investment appreciation, earnings, we're going to get a lot more investment. And again, one of the reasons I think our economy will just be on fire, because not only do we have headquarters, manufacturing facilities, we've got investments increasing tenfold, which means new ideas, new businesses, more employees, and greater products to enhance our life. It's just win, win, win.
Okay, your professional opinion here, is there anything more beneficial to an economy than savings and investment?
No, I think that's got to be up there. There's
That,
certainly a lot of things are important and beneficial, but savings and investment is one of the big things. And I've told you this before. One of my colleagues at my accounting firm, I was explaining the FAIRtax, and he's a deals guy. He immediately, his eyes lit up. He's like, "This will encourage savings. This will encourage investment." He's like, "This is great," because for that very reason.
all right, well, we're really pretty quick on time, and so let's again, actually, I need to circle back to Ron's funeral if I can. The casket was closed. I'm not sure that he went to his eternal resting place wearing his FAIRtax shirt. It wouldn't surprise me if he did. But I don't know what they call them, those little pamphlets that they hand out at funerals. You may have noticed it. The picture on that they had of Ron on his little pamphlet, he was wearing his FAIRtax pin on his lapel. So he was a FAIRtax supporter to the very end. I'll see if I can find a picture of that and put that up here. But I meant to mention that earlier and it slipped my mind, but I wanted to be sure we got that in. So
Absolutely. Well, and all the slideshow of his, at his funeral, I mean, 60% of the time that he was in a picture, he had a FAIRtax hat or a shirt on. I loved it.
yeah, well, there, right there it is, right to the very end. He was supporting the FAIRtax. We got a little, about a minute and a half left. We need to invite people to support AFFT. Two really good ways to do that. Join the 1040 Club and help get the FAIRtax marketplace going.
Yes, absolutely. The 1040 Club is necessary. AFFT does have expenses, state registration fees, 501c4, and filings, and liability insurance, for example, when we hold events. Would just be a reminder, if you do want to hold an event where you're promoting the FAIRtax at a state fair or at a Sunday morning farmers market, wherever, just let, I think it's Jim Bennett, know beforehand. And as long as it's known beforehand, you're covered under that liability insurance. But just another example of the cost that the entity does bear.
And if you get that insurance through Jim Bennett, it's no cost to you. AFFT pays that.
Correct.
And, you know, if somebody slips and falls at your booth, you're covered. So it's only wise to do that. So again, that's jim.bennett@fairtax.org if you need to get a hold of that one. And again, Jade, I thank you again so much for you look like you want to say something. You got about 20 seconds.
No, well, I know you wanted to mention FAIRtax Marketplace. Really appreciate how you guys have honed in on that on a few episodes. But the more and more vendors we get, the more and more spending on things we were going to buy anyway, the more money comes into the AFFT coffers, which then links into Steve Hayes's point of then we can actually be more active, more advertising, more pointed, grassroots type of involvement with other politicians. So,
all right, and that is going to wrap up this edition of FAIRtax Power Radio. Thanks again so much for helping us out. I'm Bob Paxton.
I'm Jade Walle.
The FAIRtax guys reminding you the FAIRtax is the only truly fair tax, and once you understand it,
you'll demand it.
The FAIRtax is a tax replacement plan where we take all the federal income taxes, including corporate, personal, gift, and estate taxes, and replace them with one national consumption tax on new purchases, above the poverty level only. This form of consumption tax comes with no exceptions and is progressive, not regressive. The poor are not paying more, and the rich are not paying less. What makes it progressive is that all Americans are untaxed up to the poverty level via the prebate, much like your standard tax deduction. The taxes are collected by retail businesses at state level, so the system is more accountable. The IRS is done away with, and you have control over your money and what the overall tax rate your household pays. The FAIRtax is revenue neutral, so the government receives the same amount of money as they do now, and it's fair because you decide what's fair, not them. To learn more, visit fairtax.org and be sure to like us on social media to help educate your friends and spread the word.